Happy October, everybody. Happy DataHub Town Hall. For those of you I've not met, my name is Maggie. I'm the Community Product Manager for DataHub. We have a jam-packed agenda, as we always do. So let's go ahead and get that going. So today we have, we're going to do some community updates, some roadmap updates. We'll jump into that. Shirshanka will give us a rundown of what we've pushed through in version 0.9.0. We have a case study from the Grab team, some upcoming upcoming ingestion sources with dbt Cloud and Unity Catalog. John and I are going to give a rundown of how you can use Acryl Data's metadata tests to start automating a lot of governance workflows. We also have some saved view feature, the sneak peek there, and then we'll talk through some performance updates. So plenty to get through. Let's start with our community update. As of this morning, we have 4,900, nearly 5,000 people in our Slack community. We're continuing with a trend of welcoming over 300 people per month, which is just amazing to see the continued influx there. This last month, we had just over 900 weekly active users, around 6,000 messages posted, 700 emojis added. So still we see just really vibrant and supportive community. Speaking of support and kind of throughput, we saw a little bit of a dip in the number of PRs opened in the past 4 weeks as compared to the month prior. That being said, the month prior, we saw an all-time high in early September of 72 PRs opened in a single week. So nothing to be alarmed by here. We're just kind of getting back to our equilibrium. In terms of support messages in our Slack instance, we also saw a little bit of a dip here, but we're still seeing around 600 questions come in per week. So, still a ton of great conversations and troubleshooting happening in the support channels. And as I like to remind folks, if you are able to jump in and provide help with, for other folks, we truly appreciate it. It gives us much more bandwidth to focus on moving through PRs and making sure that the project is in tip-top shape. Let's talk roadmap really quickly. Before I get into that, I just want to give a little bit of background. Earlier this year, with this one, last week, so on October 18th, we sent out a poll asking folks about what the impact would be if we changed how documentation is stored and removed Markdown as a requirement. We'll get into that. We'll kind of get into the implications of that momentarily. Separately, earlier this year, we sent out a poll asking folks about what types of collaboration would be kind of like most appreciated or most widely used within DataHub. So both of those polls, I just want you all to know, like, those completely feed our roadmap. We take all that feedback very seriously and take that into consideration. So in Q4, over the next couple of months, we have a handful of improvements that we'll see in the user experience. Saved views, which I'm not going to spend too much time on that because John's giving a demo a little bit later. We will be supporting manual data lineage from the UI. This is the #1 upvoted feature request. I think right now there's something around like 80 upvotes or something on it. We'll be making some improvements to the new user experience, so making it easier, more intuitive for folks to onboard onto DataHub. And time permitting, we have a stretch goal of supporting functionality to subscribe to an entity within DataHub so you can get notifications when something changes. On the theme of collaboration, what we heard from folks is that people want DataHub to connect with the tools that are already driving and fueling collaboration. So we're going to be working on some upcoming actions to just make it really easy to go from DataHub into Jira and DataHub into Slack. That way you can be within DataHub, but then also push that information where you're already collaborating. And then we actually have some community members that are driving some initiatives. The G research team is going to be working on impact analysis in Neo4j. So for folks that are using Neo4j as your graph database instead of Elastic, instead of, is it Elastic? Am I right? Yeah, instead of Elastic, you'll be able to use impact analysis, which is really exciting. And then the Grab team is going to be working on a documentation overhaul. So that's incorporating that feedback from that poll that I just showed. If you want to learn more about the documentation overhaul, kind of the use cases, I encourage you to join the Design DataHub documentation channel, where we're having a bunch of really great conversations there. Y'all know that I love this community. Y'all know that I love when we help each other out. Excel has always been our rising star, or like shining star of support, but this month we actually had a handful of folks who showed up and continually helped and really jumped in a bunch. So massive thanks to Pablo, Patrick, and Pedro, as well as Excel. You guys are really just showing up and supporting community members across topics, across channels. We truly appreciate it. But we also had some other great folks jumping in and helping out. And like I said, the more that folks can jump in and help out, it allows us to focus on our roadmap items, push through those kind of like big ticket features, and also review and move through your PRs. The other thing we talk about is that code is not the only way that you can contribute to the community. This is a great example by Iman, who recently put out a blog post. I actually think this was published maybe yesterday, on how to get up and running with Databricks and DataHub in 5 minutes. I highly recommend checking out this post. Super informative. She does a great job of just kind of keeping it kind of bare bones. Here's exactly what you need to do to get up and running. So fantastic work there, Iman. Thank you so much. Another thing that I thought was fantastic, Patrick reached out to me a couple months ago, and when he's working on kind of rolling out DataHub within Herb, which is a company based out of Brazil. And he set up kind of like a scavenger hunt within DataHub and wanted to send a DataHub swag box to the first person that found a specific entity. So it's a really just like a really great way to kind of like get people excited about DataHub. We have a bunch of swag we can always send out. So if this is something that's interesting to you, or if you have ideas on how to encourage adoption within your organization, please feel free to reach out to me. We can make that happen. Speaking of DataHub swag, y'all may have seen our swag packs. People love them. I personally love them. But sneak peek, we have some end of year swag coming. And I will only show you that it will come in a box, and it will have some package material and 6 other items that I guarantee you will love. So keep an eye on that. We'll be announcing how we can kind of start to divvy up some of that swag. The other thing, okay, so when we talk about ways to support the community, another thing that's super impactful is to kind of officially announce that your organization has adopted DataHub. It lends a ton of credibility to the project, and it also helps folks understand kind of like, you know, the types of organizations that are using the tool, kind of maturity or depth of their tech stack, and what that integration may look like. So big shout out to the Class Dojo team. They recently have officially adopted DataHub. So congrats on the awesome work there, folks. And if you or your organization have officially adopted DataHub, let's celebrate you. I know it isn't a small amount of work, so we want to make sure that we're taking the time to congratulate you all there. I'm almost done, I promise. We recently announced our DataHub community blog. Wanted to remind you all that the Etsy team just recently pushed out our first contribution to that blog about their adoption journey. So massive thanks to Vishal, Juan, and James for helping make that happen. Also Elizabeth Cohen on my team, thanks for driving that through as well. If you'd like to contribute to that, please feel free to jump into the Contribute DataHub blog channel, and we will get you going. I think that's the fastest I've ever talked in my entire life. Let's move over to project updates.
All right.
Oh, do you want me to take this one, Shirshanka?
No, I can take it. Cool. So we merged, the usual 150 plus PRs in October, a little bit less than the staggering 291 that we did in September. I don't know what happened there. We'll have to do a little retro on why September is a productive coding month compared to October across the world, clearly. But massive shout out, 0.9 is here and working, and most people seem to have upgraded to it successfully. So big shout out to getting that big release over the finish line. We had a large number of contributors to it, 28, including 7 first-time contributors and 21 repeat contributors. I was just looking at what has been cooking since 0.9 because we're about to do 0.9.1, and it's quite a big list of new things that we've actually done right after that release. So let's move on into kind of the release highlights. You probably already know 0.9 has column level lineage. Impact analysis on columns is coming up in 0.9.1. I think we merged the PR literally yesterday. We also have advanced search now in 0.9, so it allows you to not just use the search bar, but actually get much more deep insights by allowing for searching by tags, descriptions, things like that. Lots of improvements in site performance, so you should see a much more snappy experience browsing DataHub now. On the integration side, we've had a ton of improvements. Snowflake now supports column level lineage. Looker and LookML also support column level lineage with some caveats. And multi-project support, which was kind of a big thing, also is supported with LookML now. Tableau also supports column level lineage. We just merged the PR yesterday. DBT meta mappings are now supported at the column level. BigQuery beta, which had been incubating for a while, has now been promoted to stable. The big thing about this, just like the Snowflake beta that got promoted to Snowflake, is that now you no longer need to run two different connectors. There's one connector that pulls in everything: schemas, audit logs, query logs, lineage, usage, all of that, just single connector. Also, a lot of improvements to Kafka Connect, Presto on Hive, and a bunch of other connectors that I didn't even have space to list here. So a lot of improvements on the ingestion side. Last but not the least, dev experience and platform has been kicking ass as well. Our build is on Java 11, as you know, with a few exceptions for Java 8. And our quick start now supports an Arch flag for M1, so you can just force. We were hearing lots of community members where the quick start wasn't quite detecting the M1 architecture reliably. So we now have an Arch flag, so you can deterministically spin up DataHub for your architecture locally. A bunch of fixes to automatic retention of metadata, and a lot of performance improvements were in that release, and a lot of performance improvements are actually baking, and David is going to walk us through those improvements later today. And that's all I had.
All righty. We are going to move over to our community case study. So we're hearing from the Grab team. They are based out of Singapore, so it is the actual middle of the night for them. So they pre-recorded it, and we will get that playing. Let me just get this going 1 second.
Hi, everyone. And thanks to Maggie and the rest of the wonderful team at Acryl Data for having us today. I'm sorry this will be a recording, but our team is based in Singapore and we're trying to keep a healthy schedule. Just kidding. Obviously, working in data engineering, we're quite nocturnal, but we just wanted to save you from our late night faces, okay? In any case, let's get started. My name is Alex. I work on the data platform product team here at Grab. And together with my teammates, Amanda and Harvey, today we're going to tell you about our journey to improve data discoverability with computational data governance here at Grab. But first, for those of you who do not know, Grab is the leading super app in Southeast Asia. We operate across 8 countries in the region: Malaysia, Indonesia, Singapore, Thailand, Vietnam, Myanmar, Cambodia, and the Philippines. We are the everyday everything hub that combines mobility, deliveries, and financial services across a vibrant and diverse region of nearly 700 million people. Our large consumer base and the multiple lines of business generate a huge volume of data. And all Grabbers use data on a daily basis to make decisions or to augment our systems with data. The longer it takes for the right data to be discovered, the bigger the missed opportunity for us to generate value back into our marketplace. Hence, the criticality of metadata management, which we're broadly breaking up into the very intertwined data discoverability and data governance. In order to cater for this, and after evaluating multiple options, in 2021, we decided to invest in DataHub for 3 main reasons. First, the autonomy and flexibility to customize it according to the needs of the data community here at Grab and the specifics of our data infrastructure. Second, the maturity of the technology and the advanced metadata architecture And third and potentially foremost, the amazing community behind DataHub that is driving the solution forward. I'll be surprised if there is another metadata management solution out there that has almost 5,000 people behind it. With that, let me pass it over to Harvey and Amanda for the more interesting and practical part of today's talk. Thank you.
Thanks, Alex, for the intro. Indeed, DataHub is so extensible with a strong community at the back that is pushing towards the forefront of metadata management. At Grab, we fought the DataHub repo and we rebranded it as Hubble. Since DataHub was deployed at Grab a few months ago, tens of releases have been made internally. We established a streamlined release process to ensure we have an easy way to merge our code changes with DataHub new releases. Our release cadence closely follows the community one. Each release is rebased against a recent community version with additional features developed internally at Grab. Some of those have been contributed back to the community. Next, Amanda and I will highlight some features that we extend from DataHub for data discovery and data governance use cases. Let me start off with data discovery. With big data comes big metadata. Scalability has been rarely an issue for DataHub. To date, we ingest 3.5 million metadata change proposals to GMS either synchronously or asynchronously on a daily basis. That translates to around 40 MCPs per second. We managed to ingest metadata for over 100,000 tables within 15 minutes with parallelism in place using Presto on Hive plugin, which has now been open sourced. We also created additional entities and aspects to the metadata graph, one of which is a generic entity type. We call it others to cover custom entities at Grab. I'll share more later too. Here, I'd like to share how we scale Hive ingestion to reduce ingestion time from over 20 hours using original Hive plugin to 15 minutes with a new plugin that we initially developed called Presto on Hive. From the original Hive plugin, metadata is fetched by looking through every schema, table, and view. If there are X schemas, Y tables, and Z views, there will be in total X plus Y plus Z described queries sent to Hive server 2. To parallelize the ingestion, there's no effective way to shut new and existing tables as well. So instead of connecting to Hive service, we fetch metadata directly from Hive Metastore DB, with sharding to achieve ingestion in parallel. Now, instead of using X plus Y plus Z queries as we saw when using Hive plugin, it only requires 3 queries to fetch metadata for schemas, tables, and views. With multiple parallel tasks running, we use modular operation on the MD5 hash of the schema, table, or view name to determine which task ID the schema, table, or view will be ingested from. I'm glad to share that Presto on Hive plugin has been open sourced since DataHub release 0833. Since then, we saw many community contributors that have been making incredible improvements to it. One of my favorite in DataHub is its super extensible metadata model, where you just need to define the PDL schema and update the entity registry to add a new entity or aspect, and everything else is then taken care of with auto code gen. Next, I'd like to highlight 2 examples we did on this front. First is on the dataset entity. We added a time series aspect to support sample events for Kafka topics. This feature creates tremendous value for our users, as they now can just go to DataHub and view the sample events without requesting data access to the Kafka stream itself for discovery purpose. As more use cases are onboarded, we often have to make a judgment call on whether to reuse some existing entity, add new aspects to an existing entity, or to create a new entity in the metadata model. The current subtypes aspect augments the extensibility of an entity type. For example, we can model table view, topic, or as data sets in DataHub. However, there are occasions when some entities are very bespoke to internal data platforms. As such, we create a generic entity called others in DataHub to cater to all these unique groups of use cases. It has an aspect for generic properties that support different rendering types, so that a property can be rendered as table, string, code, or JSON in the UI. In the screenshot here, what you see is an other entity with a subtype name called Skywalker MOG. Those are entities for Grab's content ranking platform. In short, DataHub's plugin-based ingestion framework and schema-first metadata model are what empowers us to make data discovery democratized across all sorts of entities. In addition to data discovery, we also use it to facilitate computational data governance. I'll now pass it over to Amanda to share more about that.
Thanks, Harvey. I will now be going through data governance in Grab. Data in Grab is extremely valuable as it forms the foundation of many of our critical systems and operations. So we really need to establish our data as something governed while delivering the greatest value and agility of these data. At Grab, data governance anchors on 3 main points. Firstly, data is immensely valuable to Grab. Great data unlocks great growth, encouraging innovations, improving operations, and the quality of our products. Secondly, data management is democratized. At Grab, there's no single role or department that owns every aspect of the data. It cannot be seen or treated in isolation, but as something that everyone in the company may be consuming from to make important decisions. Everybody in the company should be able to work with the data comfortably and confidently. And lastly, data must be agile. We need it to be at the right place and at the right time. We want it to be accessible, to have it self-served, and to enable everyone at Grab to answer questions without having to ask someone else. And because of the tech mindset at Grab, we don't want to introduce new processes. So we built on top of the easily extensible DataHub to enable our organization to use data in a governed way without introducing overheads to the organization. Information classification in Grab is a process where the owners identify the sensitivity level of the company's information to apply an appropriate level of protection to the information as it's created, updated, stored, transmitted, or deleted. The level of sensitivity would affect the user's access to the corresponding data. Prior to DataHub, we were relying on an enterprise software to help manage sensitivity levels, and customizations were extremely limited. So all we could do is to guide users through documentations and relying on them to infer and conclude the data sensitivity level. This manual work led to a lot of invalid classifications against the organizational rules. For instance, the table wasn't tagged as containing PII when the column is tagged as containing PII, which then led to several rounds of organizational-wide campaigns from our governance and cybersecurity teams to manually validate these rules across hundreds of schemas and the 100,000 tables within. This was incredibly taxing for the team, taking up a huge number of man-hours to go through them. DataHub enabled Grab to take this number down to 0. So how do we take that number down to 0? We modeled such metadata into glossary terms and notes. We added validations on the React application and on the entity service within GMS. These allowed the validation errors to be displayed both to the users using the user interface to update and to any external services ingesting these rules directly into DataHub. In this demo, you can see an attempt to set the sensitivity level of a table when the column has been tagged as PII. Having these validations shown up front allowed users to self-serve, and at the same time, they were also actively getting informed about the policy requirements within Grab. So we have talked about creating these information classification, and the next topic is how we would determine who should own these access controls. In Grab, we define these decision makers as technical data owners. These are individuals who are accountable for security access controls of the data sets they manage at a schema or database level. And as the role of the technical data owner for the schema isn't trivial, like granting access to possibly hundreds of tables at one go, we have to enforce that this person meets the minimum requirements set out by our data governance office. And considering that this seems to be a highly specific and customized piece of logic, We then decided to use the DataHub Actions framework. The DataHub Actions framework allowed us to read only the events we need. In this case, it's ownerships for schemas when there's a change to the technical data owner. From there, we could fire a request to a separate Grab internal service to validate these owners and make follow-up changes when we need it. And as such, we've also went the additional step to help the users automatically roll up to the appropriate owner if he or she doesn't meet the minimum requirements. And in this snippet, you can see that adding me, Amanda, as a technical data owner results in a Slack message being sent. And when the page gets refreshed, it gets reassigned to Harvey. And with these two customizations in place, we have ensured that the flow for data access is governed. And with that, we've come to the end of our presentation. All this is possible thanks to the amazing team working on Hubble and the support from the DataHub community. We'd also like to thank DataHub for inviting us to present, and we are looking forward to further collaborations. Thank you.
All righty. Thanks so much, Grab team. I hope you all are sleeping well. That was fantastic. Really awesome to see what's happening there. And Amanda and Harvey are both super involved in the documentation overhaul. So I do encourage you all to join that channel if you're interested. The goal is really just to support more robust documentation, making it much easier for less technical end users to navigate. You know, I think we forget that not everyone loves working in Markdown, right? Like, so making it more of a rich text experience, which will unlock a lot of functionality, such as like tagging people, adding people, collaborating or editing at the same time. So a bunch of really cool things coming there.
Yep. Yeah, so as you guys probably know, like we have an integration with DBT core. Right now that requires you to, capture the artifact files that the DBT run produces, and then provide that to an ingestion recipe so that we can ingest that and put your metadata into DataHub. We've heard a lot about people using DBT Cloud. They don't have access to these artifacts, and they still want to see all of that metadata. And so we've gone ahead and built a connector for DBT Cloud. It works largely the same way that the DBT core integration works. All of the things that you kind of know and love in the DBT Cloud connector, or in the DBT connector are supported in the DBT Cloud. So that's like meta mappings and filtering based on different types, adding things based on the query, based on the query tags, things like that. So with that, I'll just like run through a very quick demo of what that looks like. If you could kill the screen share and then I'll start it. Yep. Just yeah. So here's a DBT Cloud instance. I've gone ahead and like set up a job. All this job does is it just like, generates the docs, runs the source, and then runs DBT build. So it's pretty straightforward. And we've run it recently. And then if I switch over to my terminal, the config looks largely like very similar. All of the options that you like, target platform, things like that are still supported. You just pass in the token and then the config of your account project. I'm working on figuring out how to make the job and run ID optional. If you're running multiple jobs in your project, please holler at me on Slack, and I'd love to chat about like what you're doing, how we can support that effectively, because we need to support like a patchwork of metadata coming in from different jobs or different DBT job runs. And then you just run DataHub ingest, nice and fast on this one, in 2 seconds. And then you get the same exact view that you're normally used to with DBT in DataHub. All of the lineage of all of your models and your sources and your seeds will show up, and your test results and things like that. So yeah, that's it for the demo. As I mentioned, this is coming I'd love to chat about if you're using multiple DBT runs, how that works and what we can do to support that. And this should be coming in, by next, like end of this week or early next week. It will hopefully get merged in.
Awesome. So that was the DBT integration update. And we also wanted to give another cool update around integration with Databricks. So a quick recap on how Databricks integration works today. We already support integration with Hive, which is, Databricks workspace URL. And here's a recipe that allows you to connect to the Hive instance that runs in your Databricks account. So we support that today. You can already use this to get metadata out from your DataHub Databricks instance. We recently announced integration with Delta Lake, and that's now an incubating source. So this allows you to connect to your Delta Lake manifests directly, whether you're running within Databricks or outside. And that's another thing that is supported in terms of integration with the Databricks ecosystem. And then finally, we also support integration with Spark through a push-based engine. So you take our Spark agent, you run it as part of your Spark application, and it starts and it emits metadata out whenever the job runs, including dataset to job and job to dataset lineage. So these are all existing ways of integrating with the Databricks ecosystem. If you are paying attention to Databricks, they recently announced Unity Catalog at the Data and AI Summit, which was, I think, a couple of months ago. And what Databricks is trying to do is provide a single, access point where all of the assets within a Databricks ecosystem is cataloged and governed. So that's basically literally the sentence from the Databricks website. There's a bunch of requirements that are required before you can enable Unity Catalog. So this may or may not apply to you, but for the people who are using Unity Catalog already or planning to turn it on, we have news for you. We now support integration with Unity Catalog, and Tamas is going to walk us through what that looks like. There are obviously some limitations with Unity Catalog today. It's new technology, and so Databricks is continuously investing in it. And so I assume that these things are going to get improved over time, but there are certain limitations with what it can do today. Logically, the way to think about it is you have a workspace within Databricks and you have a Unity Catalog within it, and that actually has multiple meta stores behind it, and you might have multiple workspaces across all your Databricks accounts. And this connector is going to pull metadata out from all of these different workspaces, different Unity catalogs. It's pull-based, and it's able to pull out tables, schemas, descriptions, table-to-table lineage, and column-to-column lineage. With that, I'll hand it over to Tamas to do a quick demo.
Yeah, let me share my screen and I can show you. Okay, let me just quickly show what was my demo data. This is basically the Databricks site, how you can create lineage information in Unity Catalog. So basically there is this notebook where I just created some schema and some table and some queries just to generate some lineage. And also there is I ran some Python PySpark code as well to creating tables as well. So in Unity Catalog, how it looks like, basically you have the data explorer, which is for one metastore, and in a metastore you can have multiple catalogs, and in a catalog you can have multiple schemas, and in the schemas you can have tables, and in table you can see the columns, and you can see the lineage information there, and you can even see some kind of so if I just click here, you can see the lineage information, like the table lineage, and there is some way to check actually the column lineage as well. So as you can see, this way. Okay, but how this looks like with our integration. So if you want to capture this information in DataHub, the only thing what you need to do is using our new soon to merged Unity Catalog source, which looks quite similar like any other source. As you can see here in the config, you can only you only need to specify the Databricks workspace URL and your Databricks token. And then you can set up a couple of filters if you want, and you can add domains, and you can enable stateful ingestion as well. And also, if you want, you can enable columnar table level lineage to capture. Let me run this quickly. This recipe, actually, this runs and should load the metadata from the Unity catalog. And as you can see, it's finished. It loaded some data, and let's check it out in DataHub. So let me refresh. Now, as you can see, I have a new platform, and I have here my data sets in Databricks under this workspace and this Metastore and this catalog. And here I have the lineage demo. And if I just click here, I can see my fields here. And I also capture the properties of the table, and you also can see the column level, the table level lineage. And of course, if you just enable the show columns, then you can see as well the column level lineage as well captured in DataHub. One thing to notice actually, so so there is an option to capture table level and column level lineage. Currently, how it works, the Databricks API, you need to run one REST core for each of the column to get column level lineage. So it can be expensive in some cases. So just be careful with that.
Awesome. So let's keep moving. So both of these connectors, dbt Cloud and Unity Catalog, are landing in the next day or two, or so basically by next week, you should have it showing up in the Python clients.
Thanks so much, Tamas. Gotta love a live demo that went seamlessly. Well done, sir. All right, we are going to switch gears. So we're going to talk about a feature in Acryl Data's managed data hub called metadata tests. After that, we're going to have a sneak peek of an upcoming feature called Saved Views, and then we will be talking performance improvements. So just so you know what you're in store for. So earlier this month, John and I spoke in Budapest and at a conference called Crunch Data Conference. So what we're going to walk through is a subset of what we presented there. We'll also link to the full talk if you want to see it. But the idea is that we are collectively, as a community, as an industry, kind of all at the bottom of this Mount governance, and we don't really know how to tackle it, right? We talk a lot about how to roll out governance programs, what are the kind of the key components of governance. But the reality is a lot of us are kind of starting at the bottom of this like huge mountain of governance debt. We have thousands, if not hundreds of thousands of data sets and pipelines that we need to document. And it can be a really, really, really daunting task to figure out how do you even start. So the idea that we're going to walk through is some examples of how you can start to iteratively address data governance management through both just kind of a work framework, but then also through automated workflows within Managed Data Hub. So when we talk about incremental automated or automation-driven governance, there are kind of 4 principles for us to consider. First and foremost, we want to set really clear goals. We then want to narrow the scope and then, surprise, kind of narrow it a little bit more. We want to drive incremental action. And then as we go, measure the progress to make sure that we're hitting the goals that we set. So what are some examples of this? One thing I've personally gone through this exercise of kind of rolling out governance initiatives in a handful of companies many, many, many times. And what I found is that you really need to have a clear goal of why this is important, why governance is worth tackling. And so that could be coming from your organization, could be coming from your leadership team, it could be coming from your data team and realizing that there's some problems. But the idea is identify the problem and then set the goal of what a positive or kind of targeted outcome looks like. So maybe you have within your organization a lot of questions or concerns around compliance. Maybe in that regard, you want to start by ensuring that everything has a security classification on it. Maybe you actually are hitting a lot of issues with unreliable data. So then maybe an ownership initiative is the right path for you. But the idea here is to just set a really targeted and concise goal. The next step of it is to narrow the scope. So if you think about the entirety of your data stack, you're not going to, like, I guarantee you, you will not be successful if you seek to add ownership to 200,000 entities in a week or a month. It is not going to happen. It's just not going to happen. So narrow the scope, and some ways that you can start to kind of focus on the data that matters most is to maybe you want to target a specific platform. Maybe you want to target a specific domain. This can be really popular in companies that have adopted data mesh. Or maybe you actually want to start targeting entities that have high usage, regardless of platform, regardless of domain. But the idea is, now that you have your goal, set a very finite scope of how to start addressing that, and then also cut your scope a little bit more so you can start building out this workflow. More often than not, these are going to be initiatives where you're asking other teams to do something, right? You're asking them to own data, you're asking them to document data, you're asking them to classify it. And so really what you're doing is testing the waters in the early stages to figure out, how do you roll out these initiatives in a way that's successful? So I've been most successful when I've teamed up with highly motivated stakeholders that are attached to that problem, right? So we've set the goal up top. Maybe compliance is the issue. So maybe you want to work with your compliance or your legal team. But the idea is that you should start with a small set of stakeholders that are both invested in the outcome and are familiar with what the initiative should seek to do. The other thing is just really setting clear expectations of what you're asking them to do. Asking someone to be an owner of data, sure, like nobody will say no to that, because it's so nebulous and it honestly doesn't really mean much. So when you ask someone to be an owner, what are you explicitly asking them to do? What are the expectations? So it should be very clear of what they're expected to do. And then the last part is to create rapid feedback loops. So this could be something as simple as daily stand-ups, weekly retros, but just making sure that you're adjusting and kind of tweaking your workflows, or how you kind of go through these workflows based on their feedback. If you're having a hard time thinking through what stakeholders you might want to target, my advice is to start with making it very obvious. So working with stakeholders that are really aligned with why this is worth doing. Make it easy, right? So just help them understand exactly what you're asking for them, but also make it collaborative. So don't go in and say, here's exactly what I'm looking for you to do, and here's how you should do it. They already understand why they need to do it. They already understand what you're asking them to do. So don't overprescribe how they do it. I've personally walked into a room with Google Sheets and asked engineers to document tens of thousands of data columns, and they literally laughed me out of the room, which I will never forget that moment ever in my life. It was horrible. So please do not overprescribe the how. And then last but not least, you want to measure your progress, making sure that what you sought out, that goal that you set up top, are you actually hitting those goals? Is it having the impact that you're looking for? Do you still have the organizational support that you need? And also, don't get too married to those goals, right? Circumstances change. You're going to learn more throughout the process. Just because you set a goal up top doesn't mean that it's necessarily the right goal indefinitely. So walk into it with some flexibility. And when you are able to measure progress, automate that as quickly as possible. That way you can kind of track things systematically, and you can kind of keep an eye on how things are progressing. So those are steps 1 through 4. Lather, rinse, repeat, iterate through a different subset of data, a different set of stakeholders. I realize I've walked through this incredibly quickly. We're going to link out to the full talk that we gave in Budapest, but I wanted to pass it over to John to actually show how we can start to augment or support this framework through metadata tests in Acryl data.
Yeah, thanks, Maggie. So what we're going to do now is kind of look at a practical application of the steps that Maggie just introduced, and see how DataHub, Acryl DataHub, can help you, especially around automating some of the work involved. So in the first step, we're going to set clear goals. So imagine we have a company. We'll use the example of long-tail companions, which we usually use. But let's imagine that we've set clear governance goals at long-tail, that every data set must have at least one owner assigned. It must have well-structured semantic documentation that describes the purpose of the data. And then finally, it must have a classification. So maybe labeling from a centrally managed taxonomy. Step 2, we're going to narrow the scope, right? Like Maggie said, in our case, we've got tons of data assets. We can't just say that the platform is Snowflake, but we'll start with that. Maybe we have 5,000 tables in there. So what we can do is we can actually scope that down even further and look for the important assets in Snowflake. And maybe we define important as having a high query volume. So maybe being in the top 25% of the most used and having significant unique user count. And maybe in our case, we define that as any table that has greater than 1 user in the last 30 days. So we'll scope our initiative to those data sets. And now we'll look at how Acryl DataHub can actually help you automate the process of identifying those assets that should be in scope for governance. Roll the clip, please. So in here, we're going to look at Acryl DataHub's metadata test feature, which basically allows you to first select a subset of the assets inside of your ecosystem and then do something with them. And so what we're going to build is we're going to build a selection criteria that finds all of the Snowflake tables that are in the top 25% of most used and also have a significant unique user count. So we're basically just taking our criteria, the scoping criteria that we've outlined, and we're modeling it on DataHub, and we're using DataHub to help us find those data assets. And so we're going to look for those which have a query count percentile as greater than 75, meaning top 25% of most used. And finally, we're going to use another metric that DataHub will automatically surface for us, which is the unique users in the last 30 days. And we're going to say that that must be greater than 1. Now, once we've defined this criteria, the next thing we're going to do is we're going to kind of organize these assets. So we're going to track those assets. We're going to talk about rules in the next section, so we're just going to skip this for now and move right on to the actions piece. But what we're going to do is we're going to actually automate the process of adding a glossary term to all of those data assets. And we're going to say that all of those data assets that were identified are in tier 1. So we're going to add what we call an action, which means that any asset that matches the criteria is automatically given a tier 1 label. And any that falls out of the criteria is going to be removed from tier 1. And so we can kind of use this to enrich our metadata in real time. So we're going to create a test here. And then after some time, you're going to see that the test begins to run across your entire data catalog. And so you can see that we've detected 91 data assets that fall into that category. And if we go and view them, we can see that they've been identified as tier 1. All right, I think we can move on to the next part. So once we've kind of identified the scope of the assets that need to be governed for our initiative, we're then going to move on to driving incremental action. So this is the third step that Maggie talked about. Once we know the assets, we're going to identify the experts for the data that's in that scope. So people that should own those 91 assets. You can do this in 2 ways. One is you can look at actual Snowflake access history manually, or you can use something like DataHub, which services that to you, or you can use tribal knowledge, right? So you can actually go and do the manual work of finding those people, but I don't recommend that. And then finally, you're going to have to actually do the work to get ownership, get documentation, and get classification on those 91 assets. There's kind of no way around that. You have to have human kind of intervention in this process. And then finally, what we can do with DataHub is we can measure our progress against our governance goals. And so what we're going to view here is defining yet another metadata test that will allow us to track the data assets that meet our governance criteria. So the first thing we're going to do is we're just going to, again, define a selection criteria. In this case, we're going to identify all of the data assets that are tagged with tier 1. So you can remember we kind of grouped everything into tier 1 first. Now we're selecting all of those things. And in this case, we're going to add some rules. So these are basically conditions that all tier 1 data sets must match. And we're going to say it has to have a description. It has to have, maybe a glossary term from the classification term group. And then finally, it has to have, at least 1 owner. So we're just modeling, our definition of success in governance in DataHub. Now we can use DataHub to kind of try it out on some sample data and see which of the assets that are in scope are actually matching. See 1 failed, 1 passed. In this case, we'll just skip the actions because really we just want to monitor, how many assets are compliant versus non-compliant so that we know kind of what's remaining. And you can see here, over time, you'll be able to track those assets. So you can actually say, here are all the things that do not meet my governance standards, and you can watch that number kind of tick down as you run your governance initiative. So I think this is really useful when you're really trying to kind of iteratively track your progress and actually report on that progress to external stakeholders in governance. I think that's pretty much it for the demo. And then finally, I'll just leave you guys with what is going to be available in the open source. So what we just saw is a demo on Acryl DataHub, which provides the entire experience from defining a test, running the test against your entire catalog, reporting the results. What will be available in the open source is a couple things. So first is kind of the specification of the test format. So under the hood, all tests are going to be represented in YAML or JSON. We're going to publish that format. The second is the model itself in GMS for metadata tests and metadata test results, so that you could presumably kind of ingest metadata tests into DataHub and results into DataHub. And then finally, UI support for actually rendering those test results that you saw there at the end on the entity page. All right, and with that, I think we can conclude this one.
All right, and we are going to make an in the moment agenda swap. David, we want to make sure that we walk through the work that you have. So we're gonna jump over to you. David, would you like me to share, or do you want to share your screen?
Whatever's easier, you can share. It's fine.
Great, let's do it. Before we do that, we should welcome David to the Acryl Data team. David has been a part of the community for well over a year at this point, I think, and recently joined us. We are just absolutely thrilled to have him.
Yeah, happy to be here. Awesome team. A lot of actually what I'm talking about right now for performance improvements is actually work that was done, by the team before I got here. So I'm just kind of like giving a shout out to the great work that's being done here for, really kind of improving the performance of DataHub itself beyond what, most people are going to need. So we can go ahead and get started. So one of the situations we have is especially when we're bootstrapping an existing environment, is we have a lot of data sets to onboard. And so the initial version of DataHub has a synchronous ingestion system where those new ingested assets are being stored, right away into the database, the MySQL database. And so what we've actually done is an asynchronous ingestion path. So is there a way for me to switch the chart? Perfect. We've allowed you the ability to basically ingest asynchronously. So you can fire off a ton of requests for, new data sets and things like that to the API, and those will be dropped into a Kafka queue. And this queue can be processed asynchronously in the background. So you can dump, a million ingestion requests in there, and they'll eventually be processed and pushed into the application. And so that's, again, scaling ingestion. Some of the other performance improvements that are being done is with glossary terms. So there are some customers who have literally thousands of glossary terms on either the terms or even on a single node. And so some optimization improvements was done with the way that the GraphQL query is structured to prevent fetching information on the parent nodes where it's not needed. It's actually not shown in the UI. And by reducing that overfetching of data that we're not actually displaying, we can improve the glossary terms loading by 80 to 90%. So that's much faster. The other thing that we have is we have a write optimization for our Elasticsearch graph. So if it, say, for example, our data sets have relationships to other entities within the system, and what was happening before is that these edges were being removed and recreated unnecessarily. And so now there's logic in there to actually compute the diff, which edges should be removed and which ones should be preserved and or added. And then that's applied in a much more efficient way, which means, fewer updates that are being sent to Elasticsearch unnecessarily. So awesome performance improvements there. And then we have another case of Elasticsearch where we're really looking to scale the number of entities into the millions. And so when we're talking about, let's say you have 1 million data sets, even 2 million data sets, you're still looking at around 1 second or less, considerably less as far as response times in the UI. But what if you actually have, 5 million, 10 million data sets? What do you do in that case? Can DataHub scale with your growing requirements? And the answer is yes. And so what we've been able to do is basically allow you to shard your index in Elasticsearch, which basically means, take a large index and split it up into multiple pieces. And you only really want to do this on these largest data sets. And so what we've looked at, like, when would you want to do that, and then give you the ability to do that if you're running your own system, or if, it's managed by us, we'll do it for you, of course. And so the top 3 indices that are going to be kind of like, depending on what your environment is, but most likely it's going to be data sets, system metadata, and the graph service indexes. And there are essentially rules of thumb that you would apply. So in general, you can take a look at your indices and see, like, I've got an index that is 40 gigs. And in that case, you're going to want to shard. The first kind of step up, like if you're going from, let's say you've got 5 to 10 million documents, you probably want to have about 5 shards. And then as you grow, and as you see your, say, slow response times from the search or browse paths, you can increase the number of shards to reduce the latency. And so we can kind of help you with some best practices in how to do that in your environment. And then here's an example. So this case, but before sharding, the latency was about 7 seconds for this particular data set. This particular data set had about 7 million records in it. And so now we can reduce that to about 1.5 seconds. So again, like at this point, we might consider some additional sharding in order to get that back down to less than 1 second. But a lot of it is trial and error, because the shapes of your documents could be different and things like that. So there's a little bit of trying to figure out what's right for your environment in this whole thing, but lots of improvements. And I forgot one slide, I apologize. There's another improvement that deals with caching, entity caching. So again, reducing the latency in the UI for returning objects that are actively being used by a lot of people concurrently. So there is caching at the entity layer, and I think there's going to be additional types of caching that we're going to roll out into the product as well, again, to improve the latency on the UI. And that's it for me.
Awesome. Thank you so much, everybody. We're going to wrap it up from here. Just to be cautious or mindful of time. John and I are going to team up to get a recording out to the community today on the Sage Views preview. So we will preview that today. With that one, we're also looking for feedback. We'll have a feedback form associated with it, because we'd love to hear what folks think, how we can make that impactful feature. But otherwise, happy October. I realized today, I think this is my 13th town hall that I've hosted, which is kind of spooky, right? 13 is a spooky number. But yeah, every month it gets better and better. I really, really appreciate all of you. If you want to stick around, I'll show you my dogs in their costumes again. And we'll also stick around with any questions you might have. But otherwise, happy October, and we will talk to you all soon.